Today, the Supreme Court decided a case called Utility Air Regulatory Group versus the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. The people bringing the suit, the plaintiffs, are a large number of governments, states, local governments, industries of all types who are opposed to some Environmental Protection Agency regulations to try to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the Clean Air Act really hasn't been changed since 1970. So what has happened? Well, two important things have happened. In 2007, the Supreme Court decided a case, the name is Massachusetts, against the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. And the theory of the lawsuit was that greenhouse gas emissions are a pollutant, and that they were specifically said that the federal EPA has to regulate the emission of these greenhouse gases from automobiles, from tailpipes. The Supreme Court agreed with Massachusetts and the New England states, and said that the greenhouse gas emissions could be a pollutant. The second important thing that has happened is that the Obama administration is stymied by congressional inaction. And so over the last 3 or 4 years, the administration has decided to use the full extent of whatever executive power it has to go ahead and regulate greenhouse gas emissions, regardless of Congress's inaction. So this case was a challenge to a very important Obama administration initiative. And for the most part, the Supreme Court agreed with those opposing what EPA is doing and invalidated a good part of the regulations that the Obama administration, EPA, had enacted. So, what was the lawsuit actually about? What the federal EPA did was to list all the greenhouse gases as one pollutant. And they said, therefore, we're going to regulate them. And they said, if we're going to regulate cars, we can then go ahead under the statute and regulate other sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Here they ran into a real problem because the Clean Air Act is written very specifically, and it says that any source of pollution that emits over 250 tons of pollutant per year has to get a permit from either the EPA or the states, which actually administer the act. Now, for a lot of pollutants, that's a pretty significant amount of pollution. When it comes to something like carbon dioxide, thousands and thousands of sources of emission emit over 250 tons of carbon dioxide a year. It's nothing. It's nothing. So EPA had this huge dilemma. They realized what a political mess it would be to start regulating. At one point in the case, somebody said something like 80,000 sources of pollution. So the federal EPA said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to regulate every source that emits 250 tons. We're going to start regulating at 100,000 tons. So that cut way back on the sources that were going to be regulated, and basically went after bigger sources, but not just factories and power plants, but some other sources as well. The challengers said the EPA doesn't have the discretion to change the law. The law says you regulate every source that's over 250 tons a year, you can't just rewrite that to say, no, we're changing it to 100,000 tons a year. And so that's what a majority of the Supreme Court held in the decision. It was a 5-4 decision. It said that EPA can't do that. And the majority emphasized, I think, a very important point, and that was simply that this is really a problem for Congress to solve. The act has to be adjusted to global climate change, and if it's not adjusted, there are limits to what the federal government can do just through the executive, what the Environmental Protection Agency can do. The court did hand the federal government one victory. Another part of the regulations involve new sources of pollution. Now, there are not too many of those being built these days, but when they are built, the Clean Air Act requires that the pollution technology be very state-of-the-art, very, very modern. And that's a very important regulatory program. What the court said is if a new source of pollution is going to emit the original pollutants, carbon dioxide, particulates, and so forth, the EPA does have the power to also regulate greenhouse gas emissions. So that's a win for the administration. The EPA now has to go back to the drawing board and figure out what authority they actually have to regulate existing sources of pollution.